Okay, this is a second video in the series on how to create parts for your Automoblocks car within an assembly. So we're going to go ahead and create the connector piece that would come out of here. So I'm just going to throw a connector piece in here just real quick, just to get an idea of what one looks like. So I walk past a T9 connector. So this has a lot of detail, obviously. Now this is very, very detail oriented. There's drawings for how to do these within the curriculum. But I like to have my students create their own connector pieces, and we kind of go through and do them together as a class. So what we're going to do is we're going to, in essence, within an assembly, an Inventor, fill this full of, let's say, Play-Doh or mold, and we're going to pull this thing out of here like a tooth. And we're going to wind up making our own part from existing geometry. So one of the things I like about doing this, again, is I like the fact that my students are learning how to create parts and developing their own design within dimensions. So we are going to click on the word create, and we're going to call this connector piece 1. You could call it connector piece front, connector piece back, however you choose. I tell you what, I'm going to call this connector piece front. If you called it 1, no big deal. We can always go back and change those things. Remember in the first video, we went from connector piece to socket. We can change whatever we want. I'm going to call this connector piece front and say OK. And sometimes using these little side parts of your view cube is good to get a better view, because what we want is this back surface back here. This is what we want to take from. So we're going to click on that. And then we're going to go to our pencil. And mine's going to flip mine around for me. I don't really like that, but I can use my view cube to come back on this little corner over here. Then I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to see this surface back here again. And I want to click on that. And it's going to rotate for me. We're going to click on the Project Geometry button, because I don't really feel like drawing all that in the back again. And we're just going to find that surface again for the third time and click. Right-click and say OK. What Project Geometry has done is it's allowed us to take the geometry that already exists and use it. We don't want to redraw. So we're going to go to Finish Sketch, click on my Home button, and we're going to go to Extrude. And what I want is just the outside part. And we're going to pull this thing out of here as a solid, like a tooth. Now, instead of having to know the distance, we're going to go to the word 2. And we're just going to click on the outside face of the passenger section. Click on that. Say OK. Now, you're going to notice that we do have this gap in here. We want this gap to come back and to hit the face that we made, that little rectangle part we made when we moved the socket. So we're going to do some Project Geometry again. Let's go to our pencil. Click on the front face. I can come up here just so we can see this. Your front face right here. And we're going to go to Project Geometry again. And you click on that front face again. Finish your sketch. Go to Extrude. I'm going to click on that surface, but we're going to flip this arrow direction, and I'm going to go to 2. And what we want, if we can come down here and use our view cube, is I want that little square. You can see it right back in here. That's what I want. I want that surface of that rectangle sitting right there, and I'm going to click and say OK. Now what we've done, if I go to my side view, is we've gone from the back of this socket to here, and then we've filled in that little front gap so we can pop this into place on here. Now this work plane is going to stay back here. I really don't want this work plane to keep being visible all the time. Some people find that annoying. I kind of do as well. So I want to right click over here, and I'm going to take away the visibility of it. So what we want to do now is we want to create something that's going to be in this area here that's going to have 2 squares on it and is going to come out. So one thing we can do is we can go to our pencil and click on our front face. And let's go ahead and Project Geometry again. Project that outside surface. Now I'm going to go to Offset again, and we're going to click on the yellow line and kind of drag in a little bit. I want you to notice that if I drag in too far, I lose those arcs and curves. Now if I drag all the way into here, those go away the second I get into that little yellow dot. So I kind of want to keep those. So let's do some original design here. Try to design what we want to keep. And I'm going to say, you know, let's go 0.146. 0.146. Why not? Let's just keep that. And we're going to hit Enter. And we are going to go to Finish Sketch. And let's go ahead and extrude this thing out. I'm going to go to Extrude, and we're going to click inside the object. And that's pretty far out for one of these teeth. I mean, that's way too far out. Let's come up here and put in 0.5. Is that going to be too far? That looks a little too far for what we want. Let's do 0.45. We'll compromise a little bit, and we'll go 0.45. And we're going to flip. Now that we're back into here, what we want to do is we want to get 2 squares that are symmetrical, one on the left and one on the right. We're going to click on our pencil, and we're going to click on our drawing. So one thing we can do is let's come up to our rectangular command, and we're going to go to rectangle 2 point. And one thing you want to try to not do is you're going to see these lines show up as I drag out, and those are reference points. So if you snap to that green, you're telling Inventor, I want that point to stay there. I like to sketch unconstrained objects, and then we can go in and change them. So as I drag out, we want to decide what the right size of square is we want for our object. And I think that we're going to go, let's say 0.4 by 0.4. So I'm going to put in 0.4 and hit tab and hit 0.4, hit enter. And you're going to see that object right there. Now I want the center point of this line to horizontally line up with the center point of our sketch. So I'm going to go up to the horizontal constraint, and I'm going to find the midpoint right here of our square, which is that green dot, and then I'm going to click right here, and it's going to automatically align. I'm going to right click and say OK. We now have this perfectly aligned with that center dot. I'm going to click on the line command here. Let's go to our midpoint right here. Let's draw up, because we need for ourselves an axis to mirror this to the opposite side. So when we mirror, we're going to go to mirror, and we're going to select. Now one thing you can do is you could click on all 4 lines like this, and you would be right. One thing you can do to select everything at once is you have to go to the top right. You're going to click and hold down and drag over the top of that, and it's going to select all of those. So it would have been easy just to tap on 4 separate lines, but what if we had 100 lines, 100 little small lines? We'll just take this just like a fishing net, throw it over the top, say OK, and then click on our little mirror line right here and say apply. And it's automatically going to be symmetrical to the opposite side. You can see that symmetrical constraint show up that's right up here. That is a symmetry constraint. And you see that we've now applied that when we've mirrored. We're going to say done, and we're going to say finish sketch. And we're going to flip this around, and let's go to extrude. And we want to click inside both squares, and we want to go to cut. Now we extruded this out 0.45. We do not want this to go all the way to the back. Let's just shave off a little bit, and let's go 0.40. So we now have ourselves perfect little object like that. So let's go to OK. And let's change the color of this. The colors within the actual T9 car for Automoblocks they're all dark green. You can choose dark green and go to return, and let's go back. And you can kind of see that little connector piece that we've made. You can see it right there. It doesn't look exactly like the other ones. We can go in and do some other things to this to make it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. But I kind of like to go in and let's make a basic connector shape with the class. And then we can talk about how we can modify this together as a class. So I'm going to allow you to do that with your own class. Like, how are you going to go about changing this to where it looks a little bit more like the actual T9 connector piece. So when I come into here, obviously this has way more detail than what I have right here. This obviously has more. You can have your students go in and change it to look like what they want, but you can see the bare bones design that I've created with the students. Now this is a pretty advanced Inventor thing to get these ridges in here, and to get this thing looking exactly the way this does, especially with this detail in here. This is one of the things I like to do with my students as far as creating a connector piece. Now, one thing I want to go over with you real quick, as you see socket 1 and connector piece front, you can notice if I go to open and I come back in here now, it's in alphabetical order, so I can go to right into here. We should have all this saved right in here. So connector piece front socket, let's see here. It's not in there. No big deal from the beginning here. Yeah, but if I save this out of here, it'll all be back in here. So if I got out of here, so since I'm in my actual assembly, it's showing them just right here into this. So I'm going to go to save, and I want to save my assembly. And you can see that we have our adaptive connector piece and our adaptive socket sitting in here. I'm going to go to return, and I'm going to hit save again. And what we want to do is we want to save this, and I'm going to call this Automoblocks parts and assembly. I'll go ahead and call it that. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to call this Automoblocks parts and assembly. Say OK. Do I want to say the assembly and the 2 parts that I made? Yes to all. Say OK and say OK. Now I should be able to come back in here and see those parts. We're in the right thing. Connector piece front. There it is right there. Connector piece front. So if I go to open, it's going to notice that it's in the assembly. But look, there's the part that we just made, and it's adaptive. And I can go in here and change whatever I want to it. And since it's adaptive, it'll automatically show up back in here. I can edit the part in the assembly file, but since I have this connector piece open, it's going to think I want to mess with this separate from the assembly. I can close this out, say yes, go back to my Automoblocks and change it. So this has been a video on how to create a connector piece from the socket that we created in the first video. So in the next video, we'll talk about how to create your own designed front.